Greek philosophers once laughed at Roman discipline, calling their soldiers brutes without culture. They mocked their gods, their Latin tongue, their hunger for conquest. But in 146 BC, when the legions marched through the gates of Athens itself, the laughter died. What followed was not just a military campaign, it was the collision of two worlds, one built on thought, the other on iron, and only one would survive. Athens, late spring 146 BC. The air hung heavy with olive blossoms and dust, clinging to stone and skin. The agora buzzed with merchants haggling over wine, scribes copying texts beneath colonnades, and philosophers debating beneath the statue of Athena Primacos, her bronze spear catching morning sun. Among them stood Cleomenes, 43, lean and sharp-eyed, his beard streaked gray. He taught rhetoric in the shadow of the Stoa Poikile, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who believed words shaped the world. Beside him sat Theron, 31, broader in shoulders, a former athlete turned philosopher who still carried the posture of a javelin thrower from the Panathenaic Games. They spoke of Rome as many did, with contempt and unease. The Republic had been expanding for decades, swallowing cities and kingdoms, but Athens considered itself untouchable. It was the cradle of philosophy, birthplace of democracy, city of Socrates and Plato. What could Rome, with its legions of farmers and borrowed gods, possibly teach Athens? Cleomenes leaned against cool marble, fingers tracing a scroll's edge. They are efficient. I will grant them that, he said. But efficiency is not wisdom. A sword can cut, but it cannot think. Theron nodded, though his gaze drifted toward the northern road where dust had been rising for days. Travelers spoke of movements, cohorts marching south from Macedonia, supply trains stretching miles. They say Lucius Mummius is coming, Theron said quietly, with 4 legions. Cleomenes waved dismissively. Let him come. Athens is not Corinth. We are not rebels. We are philosophers, artists, keepers of culture. Rome needs us more than we need Rome. It was a sentiment shared by many. Athens had survived Alexander, outlasted the Diadochi, bent, but never broken. Surely Rome would see reason, respect the sanctity of the city that gave the world its greatest minds. But in the hills north of Athens, beyond olive groves and scattered farmsteads, reality was different. Lucius Mummius, consul of Rome, sat astride his horse on a ridge overlooking the valley. 52, a man of iron discipline and few words, his face weathered by campaigns in Hispania and Gaul. His armor was plain, functional, the mark of a soldier valuing results over spectacle. Behind him stretched the column, 4 legions, nearly 20,000 men, shields painted red, javelins resting on shoulders, sandals raising a cloud visible for miles. They moved with machine precision, each century in step, each cohort spaced with mathematical exactness. Mummius had been given a singular task by the Senate: pacify Greece. The Achaean League had rebelled, dared challenge Roman authority, and Corinth paid the price. The city was razed, its population sold into slavery, treasures shipped to Rome. But Athens was different. Athens had not rebelled, remained neutral, cautious, playing the wise elder watching from sidelines. Yet neutrality, Mummius knew, was a luxury Rome could no longer afford. The Senate wanted a message sent, not just to Greece but to the entire Mediterranean. Rome was not a partner. Rome was the master. He turned to Tribune Gaius Servilius, 38, scarred across the cheek from a Thracian skirmish, eyes cold and calculating. How far to the city? Mummius asked. 2 days' march, consul, Servilius replied. Scouts report no resistance. The Athenians are debating in their forums as always. Mummius allowed a thin smile. Let them debate. Words will not stop what is coming. The column moved forward, a river of iron and leather, and the earth trembled beneath their weight. In Athens, debates continued. Cleomenes stood before a gathering in the Nix, the ancient assembly ground where Pericles once spoke, where democracy was born. Around him sat the council, men of wealth and learning, faces lined with worry but voices clinging to hope. We must send an embassy, one elder argued, voice quavering. We must remind Rome of our contributions, our shared heritage. They revere our culture, study our texts. Surely they will listen. Cleomenes rose, voice steady. Rome does not listen. Rome dictates. But we are not without leverage. We are the soul of the civilized world. To destroy Athens would be to destroy the very foundation upon which Rome claims legitimacy. Theron, seated near the back, said nothing, but his hands gripped the stone bench's edge. He had heard stories from Corinth, spoken to refugees who fled south with nothing but clothes on their backs. They spoke of fire, screams, streets running red. He did not share Cleomenes' confidence, but said nothing. To speak doubt in Athens was to invite scorn. Outside the city, the legions camped for the night. Fires dotted hillsides like fallen stars, and the smell of roasting meat and wood smoke drifted on wind. Soldiers sang, low and rhythmic, songs of home and victory, voices blending into a single, relentless hum. Mummius walked among them, his presence silent reassurance. He stopped at one fire where a young legionary, no more than 20, sat sharpening his gladius. The boy looked up, face smudged with dirt, eyes bright with anticipation. "First campaign, soldier?" Mummius asked. The boy nodded. "Yes, consul. I joined after the triumph in Hispania. My father served under Scipio." Mummius placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then you know what it means to be Roman. Discipline, duty, victory." The boy straightened, pride swelling in his chest. "Yes, consul." Mummius moved on, expression unreadable. He had seen 1,000 boys like this, eager and untested, and he had seen what war did to them. Some became men, some became ghosts, but all, in the end, became Rome. As stars wheeled overhead, the distance between Athens and the legions shrank. Philosophy and iron, thought and action, the old world and the new, and in the space between them, history held its breath. If you're captivated by the clash of empires and the fall of civilizations, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching this story unfold. Now, let's step into the dust of history. Dawn broke over Athens with light poets had written about for centuries, golden and soft, spilling across the Acropolis and painting the Parthenon in amber and rose. But this morning, the beauty felt fragile, like something that could shatter at any moment. Cleomenes woke in his modest home near the Dipylon Gate, the northern entrance to the city. His wife, Euterpe, 40, her hair still dark but hands worn from years managing their household, was already awake, grinding barley for bread. She moved quietly, but he sensed the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set. "You did not sleep," she said without turning. It was not a question. "No," Cleomenes admitted, rising from the narrow bed. Through the window he could see the road stretching north, empty for now, but he knew what was coming. Everyone knew. The city had been holding its breath for days. Euterpe set down the grinding stone and turned to face him. "The council meets again today?" "Yes, we will send the embassy, we must." She studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard that had appeared seemingly overnight in recent years. "And if Rome refuses to listen?" Cleomenes reached for his himation, the woolen cloak marking him as a man of learning. "Then we will have done what we could. Athens has always survived through wisdom, not through swords." Euterpe said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. She had heard the stories too, seen refugees streaming south from Corinth, their eyes hollow, voices broken. She turned back to her work, and Cleomenes left without another word. The streets were quieter than usual. Shopkeepers opened stalls with mechanical movements, their usual banter replaced by nervous glances toward the north. Children played in alleys, but their laughter sounded forced, as if trying to convince themselves everything was normal. Near the agora, Cleomenes found Theron already waiting, leaning against a column, arms crossed. "You look like you slept as well as I did," Theron said. "Which is to say, not at all." Cleomenes managed a weak smile. "The mind does not rest when history is at the door." They walked together toward the Pnyx, where the council was gathering. The assembly ground filled with men, faces grave, voices low. Cleomenes recognized most: Philon, the wealthy merchant who made his fortune trading with Egypt; Demetrios, the aging general who once commanded Athenian forces against Macedonian raiders; Nicias, the young orator who fancied himself the next Demosthenes. They all carried the same expression, a mixture of defiance and fear. The archon, Aristomenes, 67, his back bent with age but mind still sharp, called the assembly to order. His voice, though weakened by time, still carried authority. "Citizens of Athens," he began, "we stand at a crossroads. Rome approaches, and we must decide how to meet them." Philon stood, his voice booming. "We are not Corinth. We did not rebel. We have no quarrel with Rome. If we send an embassy, if we offer gifts, they will see reason." Demetrios rose slowly, joints creaking. You speak as if Rome cares about reason. I have fought wars, Philon. I have seen what happens when empires decide they want something. They take it. Words will not stop them. Nicias, eager to make his mark, jumped to his feet. But we are Athens, the birthplace of civilization. To destroy us would be to destroy themselves. They study our philosophers, copy our art, send their sons to learn from our teachers. They need us. Cleomenes stood, and the assembly fell silent. His reputation as a teacher, as a man of measured thought, commanded respect. Nicias is right that Rome values our culture, he said carefully. But Demetrios is also right that empires do not think like philosophers. They think like soldiers. However, we must try. We must send an embassy, not because we believe it will succeed, but because we must be able to say we exhausted every option. If Rome destroys Athens, let it be on their conscience, not ours. The assembly murmured in agreement. Aristomenes nodded slowly. Then it is decided. We will send an embassy. Cleomenes, you will lead it. Choose 2 others to accompany you. Cleomenes felt the weight settle on his shoulders. He glanced at Theron, who gave a slight nod. I will go, Theron said. And I, added Nicias, voice eager. Cleomenes wanted to refuse the young orator, but he knew Nicias represented Athens' youth, the generation that still believed in the power of words. Very well, Cleomenes said. We leave at midday. Outside the city, the Roman camp stirred with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Soldiers broke down tents, packed supplies, formed ranks with practiced ease. Mummius stood at the center, watching, assessing. Servilius approached, a leather satchel in hand. Consul, the scouts report Athens is preparing an embassy. They will likely meet us on the road. Mummius nodded. Good. Let them come. It will save us time. And your response? Servilius asked. Mummius was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the southern horizon where Athens lay hidden beyond the hills. We will hear them. Rome is not unreasonable, but they must understand that neutrality is no longer an option. They will submit, or they will suffer the consequences. Servilius hesitated. The Senate's orders were clear, Consul. Pacify Greece. But Athens is different. The men speak of it with reverence. I know what Athens is, Mummius interrupted, voice hard. I have read Plato. I have studied their history. But Rome does not build its future on the past glories of others. We build it on our own strength. If Athens wishes to remain Athens, they will bow. If not, he let the sentence hang in the air. Servilius nodded and withdrew. The column began to move, a serpent of iron and discipline winding south. The sun climbed higher, and heat pressed down on the land. In Athens, Cleomenes, Theron, and Nicias prepared to leave. They wore their finest robes, carried scrolls of Athenian treaties and declarations, and walked through the Dippolon gate with as much dignity as they could muster. A small crowd gathered to see them off, silent and solemn. Euterpe stood among them, her eyes meeting her husband's for a brief moment. He saw the fear there, the unspoken plea for him to be careful, to come back. He nodded once, then turned north, toward the dust cloud rising in the distance. The 3 men walked in silence, the road stretching before them, the weight of Athens on their backs. Above them, the sky was a brilliant, merciless blue, and the sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil. Somewhere ahead, Rome was waiting. The road north from Athens was ancient, worn smooth by centuries of feet, hooves, and cartwheels. It wound through olive groves and past scattered farmsteads, their whitewashed walls gleaming in the midday sun. Cleomenes, Theron, and Nicias walked in silence for the first hour, each man lost in his own thoughts. The weight of what they carried pressed down on them like the heat. Nicias was the first to break the silence. He was 26, tall and lean, with restless energy that came from youth and ambition. His dark hair was oiled and carefully arranged, his beard trimmed in the fashion of younger philosophers who gathered in the Lyceum. We should rehearse our arguments, he said, voice bright with nervous enthusiasm. We need to present a unified position. If we can frame our case in terms of mutual benefit, of shared cultural heritage, Nicias, Theron interrupted gently. This is not the assembly. This is not a debate where the best argument wins. These are soldiers. They think in terms of power, not persuasion. Nicias bristled. Then what do you suggest? That we simply bow and beg for mercy? I suggest, Theron said, voice measured, that we remember who we are speaking to. Mummius is not a philosopher. He is a consul of Rome, a man who has burned cities and sold populations into slavery. Our words will not move him unless they align with what Rome wants. Cleomenes, walking between them, raised a hand. Both of you are right in your own way. Nicias, your passion is admirable, but Theron speaks truth. We must be pragmatic. Our goal is not to win a debate. Our goal is to buy time, to make Rome see that destroying Athens serves no purpose. We are not a threat. We are a symbol, and symbols have value. They walked on, dust rising around their sandals, the sun climbing higher. In the distance, they could see the dust cloud growing larger, a brown smudge against the blue sky. The legions were close now, perhaps only a few miles away. Cleomenes felt his heart begin to beat faster, a sensation he had not experienced since his youth. But this was different. This was not about glory. This was about survival. By early afternoon, they reached a small rise where the road dipped into a shallow valley, and there, spread across the landscape like a living organism, was the Roman army. Nicias stopped in his tracks, breath catching. "By the gods," he whispered. Theron said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Cleomenes forced himself to keep walking, though every instinct screamed at him to turn back. The legions were arrayed in marching formation, 4 columns moving in perfect synchronization. The sun glinted off thousands of helmets, off the iron tips of javelins, off the bronze fittings of shields. The sound reached them now, a low rumble like distant thunder, the tramp of boots, the creak of leather, the occasional bark of a centurion's command. It was the sound of inevitability. At the head of the column, a group of horsemen broke away and rode toward them. Cleomenes stopped and waited, his hands clasped in front of him, trying to project calm. Theron and Nicias flanked him, their faces pale but composed. The horsemen approached at a steady trot, their mounts well-trained and disciplined. At their head rode Mummius, his armor dusty from the road, his face impassive. Beside him was Servilius, and behind them, a dozen cavalrymen, their hands resting casually on the hilts of their swords. Mummius reined in his horse a few paces away and studied the 3 Greeks with detached interest. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mummius broke the silence, his Latin crisp and precise. "You are from Athens." It was not a question. Cleomenes stepped forward and replied in Latin, his accent careful but clear. "We are, Consul. I am Cleomenes, teacher of rhetoric. This is Theron, philosopher and former athlete, and Nicias, orator. We come as representatives of the city to speak with you on behalf of the council and the people of Athens." Mummius dismounted with the ease of a man who had spent half his life on horseback. He was shorter than Cleomenes had expected, but there was a solidity to him, a sense of compressed power. His eyes, gray and cold, swept over the 3 men. "You speak Latin?" Mummius observed. "That is good. It will make this easier." "We are educated men, Consul," Cleomenes said. "We have studied your language, your history, your laws. Athens has always respected Rome." "Respect," Mummius repeated as if tasting the word. "Tell me, Cleomenes, does Athens respect Rome? Or does Athens tolerate Rome, the way a grandfather tolerates a crude but useful grandson?" Cleomenes felt the trap in the question but pressed forward. "Athens admires Rome, Consul. Your republic has achieved what few civilizations have, the ability to unite disparate peoples under a single banner. We see in Rome the potential for greatness, the kind of greatness that Athens once embodied." Mummius smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Once embodied. You speak of Athens in the past tense, as if you already know what is coming." Nicias, unable to contain himself, stepped forward. "Consul, Athens is the birthplace of democracy, of philosophy, of art and science. To harm Athens would be to harm the very foundations of civilization. Rome itself has benefited." "Enough," Mummius said, his voice cutting through Nicias's speech like a blade. "I did not march 4 legions across Greece to receive a lecture on history." He turned his gaze back to Cleomenes. "You came to negotiate. So negotiate. What does Athens offer Rome?" Cleomenes took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "Athens offers its loyalty, Consul. We have remained neutral in the conflict with the Achaean League. We have not taken up arms against Rome. We ask only to be allowed to continue as we have as a center of learning and culture, under Roman protection." "Protection," Mummius said. "You mean submission." "We mean partnership," Cleomenes replied. Mummius was silent for a moment, his eyes distant, as if calculating something. Then he spoke, his voice flat. "The Senate has given me clear instructions. Greece is to be pacified. Athens will submit to Roman authority. You will dismantle your council, accept a Roman governor, and pay tribute. In return, your city will be spared." Theron spoke for the first time, his voice low. "And if we refuse?" Mummius met his gaze. "Then you will share Corinth's fate." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Cleomenes felt the ground shift beneath him. "Consul," he said, voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest, "what you ask is the end of Athens. Not its destruction, but its death nonetheless. Then it will be a monument." Mummius said, "Rome does not need Athens to be what it was. Rome needs Athens to be what Rome requires." He turned and remounted his horse. "You have until tomorrow at dawn to deliver your answer. If Athens submits, I will enter the city peacefully. If not," he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Mummius wheeled his horse and rode back toward the column. The three Athenians stood alone on the road, the dust settling around them. Nicias was trembling, his face flushed with anger. He did not even listen. He listened, Cleomenes said quietly. He simply did not care. Theron looked back toward Athens. "We have until dawn. We need to return and tell the council." As they began the long walk back, the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Behind them, the Roman camp spread across the land, and the sound of hammers echoed as the legions built their fortifications. In the distance, a lone eagle circled overhead, its cry sharp and mournful. And in that moment, Cleomenes understood that no matter what choice Athens made, the world had already changed. The sun was low on the horizon when Cleomenes, Theron, and Nicias passed back through the Dippolon gate. The guards, recognizing them, said nothing, but their eyes asked the question their mouths would not. Cleomenes shook his head slightly, and the guards looked away. Word spread quickly in Athens. By the time the three men reached the mix, a crowd had already gathered, their faces etched with anxiety. Torches were being lit as twilight descended, casting flickering shadows across the ancient stones. The council sat in a semicircle, Aristomenes at the center, his aged face grave. Cleomenes stood before them, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. "Speak, Cleomenes," Aristomenes said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What did Rome say?" Cleomenes drew a breath. "Consul Mummius has given us until dawn tomorrow to decide. We must dismantle our council, accept a Roman governor, and pay tribute. In exchange, the city will be spared destruction." The assembly erupted. Voices overlapped, some shouting in outrage, others in fear. Philon rose, his face red. "This is extortion. We have done nothing to warrant such treatment." Demetrios stood more slowly, his old soldier's instincts reading the situation clearly. "It does not matter what we have done. What matters is what Rome wants, and Rome wants submission." Nicias, still trembling with the humiliation of the encounter, found his voice. "We cannot simply surrender everything our ancestors built. Athens without self-governance is not Athens. It is a corpse wearing our city's name." Theron, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "And Athens destroyed is not even that. It is dust and memory." The debate raged for an hour, voices rising and falling like waves against a shore. Some argued for submission, citing the fate of Corinth, the practicality of survival. Others argued for resistance, invoking the spirits of Marathon and Salamis, the times when Athens had stood against impossible odds and prevailed. But those had been different times, Cleomenes thought. Those had been battles against Persians, against enemies who could be met on the field. Rome was different. Rome did not simply conquer. Rome absorbed, transformed, erased. Aristomenes finally raised his hand, and the assembly fell silent. "We must vote," he said. "Those in favor of submission, signify." Hands rose, perhaps a third of the assembly. Cleomenes saw Philon among them, saw the merchant's pragmatic calculation written on his face. Those in favor of resistance. More hands rose, but not enough to constitute a clear majority. Many sat with hands in their laps, paralyzed by the impossibility of the choice. Aristomenes looked around the assembly, his eyes tired. "We are divided, and a city divided cannot stand. Not against what is coming." He paused, then continued. "I propose a middle path. We send another embassy at dawn, but this time we offer a compromise. We will accept Roman oversight, but we ask to maintain our council in an advisory capacity. We will pay tribute, but we ask that it be reasonable, not punitive. We will acknowledge Roman authority, but we ask to preserve our identity." It was a desperate gambit, a hope that Rome might accept something less than total submission. But it was also the only path that might unite the fractured assembly. The vote was called again, and this time, a majority agreed. It was not enthusiasm, but exhausted consensus. As the assembly dispersed, Cleomenes found himself standing alone on the Nix, looking out over the city. The lights of Athens twinkled below, oil lamps and torches creating a constellation of human habitation. Theron approached, his footsteps soft on the stone. "Do you think it will work?" he asked. Cleomenes did not turn. "No, but it is what we have." In the Roman camp, the legions had settled in for the night with the efficiency that came from years of practice. Tents were erected in precise rows. Cook fires burned in designated areas. Sentries were posted at regular intervals. It was a temporary city, built in hours, that would be dismantled just as quickly when the order came to march. Mummius sat in his command tent, a simple structure no larger than those of his officers. A map of Greece lay spread across a wooden table, weighted down at the corners with stones. Servilius stood across from him, a cup of watered wine in his hand. "The men are asking about Athens," Servilius said. "They have heard stories. Some are eager to see it. Others are uncomfortable with the idea of entering the city by force." Mummius looked up from the map. "Uncomfortable? They see Athens as sacred ground in a way, the birthplace of the philosophers they studied as boys. There is a sense that to harm Athens would be to harm something essential." Mummius set down the stylus he had been using to mark positions. "Tell the men that Athens is a city like any other. Stone and wood, flesh and blood. It has no divine protection. If it submits, it will be treated with respect. If it resists, it will be treated as Corinth was treated. The choice is theirs." Servilius nodded, but did not move to leave. "And if they choose submission, Consul, do we truly install a governor, dismantle their institutions?" "We do exactly what I told them we would do," Mummius said. "Rome does not bluff, Servilius. If we make a threat and do not follow through, every city in the east will see it as weakness. But if Athens submits, we will be measured. We will take what we need, but we will not destroy what we do not have to. There is value in Athens, even if the Athenians themselves no longer see it." He stood and walked to the tent's entrance, looking out at the camp. The Senate wants Greece pacified. That does not necessarily mean Greece destroyed. A living Athens under Roman control is more useful than a dead one, but it must be under Roman control. That is not negotiable. Servilius drained his cup. "And if they send another embassy tomorrow with some compromise proposal?" Mummius smiled thinly. "Then we will listen politely and we will refuse. Rome does not compromise, Servilius. Rome dictates terms." In Athens, the night deepened. Cleomenes finally returned home to find Euterpe still awake, sitting by the small hearth, her hands idle in her lap. She looked up as he entered, and he saw the question in her eyes. "We have until dawn," he said, sitting beside her. "We will try once more to negotiate." She reached for his hand, her fingers cold despite the warmth of the room. "And if they refuse? Then we submit, or we die." The words hung between them, stark and terrible. Euterpe was silent for a long moment, then spoke, her voice steady. "I have lived in this city all my life. My mother was born here, and her mother before her. If Athens falls, what becomes of all that?" Cleomenes had no answer. He simply held her hand and stared into the dying embers of the fire. Outside, the city slept fitfully, and in the hills to the north, 20,000 Roman soldiers did the same, their dreams filled with visions of home, of glory, of the next march and the next battle. And above them all, the stars wheeled in their ancient courses, indifferent to the dramas of men, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires. Dawn was coming, and with it, the moment of choice. Dawn came cold and gray, the sky streaked with clouds that promised rain. Cleomenes woke before first light, his body stiff from a night spent more awake than asleep. Euterpe was already moving about the house, preparing bread and olives, her movements mechanical, her face drawn. They ate in silence, the food tasteless in Cleomenes' mouth. When he rose to leave, Euterpe caught his arm. "Come back to me," she said simply. He nodded, unable to speak, and stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness. At the Dippolon gate, he found Theron and Nicias already waiting. Nicias looked as though he had not slept at all, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands trembling slightly. Theron appeared calmer, but Cleomenes knew him well enough to see the tension in his shoulders. Aristomenes arrived moments later, leaning heavily on a walking stick, his breath labored. "I will come with you," the old Archon said. "This is too important to leave to others." Cleomenes wanted to protest, to spare the old man the journey, but he saw the determination in Aristomenes' eyes and simply nodded. The four men passed through the gate as the first pale light touched the eastern horizon. The road north was empty, the farmsteads silent. In the distance they could see the Roman camp, a geometric arrangement of tents and fortifications that looked carved from the landscape itself. As they approached, a patrol of Roman cavalry intercepted them. The lead rider, a young decurion with a scar across his nose, looked them over with professional detachment. "You are the Athenian embassy?" he asked in accented Greek. "We are," Aristomenes replied, his voice steady despite his labored breathing. "We come to speak with Consul Mummius." The decurion nodded and gestured for them to follow. They were led through the camp, past rows of tents where soldiers sat cleaning weapons and repairing equipment. The legionaries watched them pass with curious eyes, some with respect, others with the cold assessment of men sizing up potential enemies. The camp was a marvel of organization, Cleomenes thought. Every tent was spaced exactly, every fire pit positioned with mathematical precision. It was the physical manifestation of Roman discipline, and it was terrifying in its efficiency. They were brought to Mummius's command tent. The consul was already awake, standing over the same map table, his armor on, his face freshly shaved. Servilius stood beside him along with 2 other officers. Mummius looked up as they entered, his gray eyes sweeping over the 4 Athenians. His gaze lingered on Aristomenes, taking in the old man's age and frailty. "You have brought your archon," Mummius observed. "That suggests you take this seriously." "We do, consul," Aristomenes said, stepping forward with as much dignity as his failing body would allow. "I am Aristomenes, Archon of Athens. I come to speak for my city." Mummius gestured to a bench. "Sit, old man. There is no need for you to stand." Aristomenes hesitated, pride warring with practicality, then lowered himself onto the bench with a grateful sigh. Cleomenes, Theron, and Nicias remained standing. "You have come with your answer," Mummius said. It was not a question. Aristomenes drew a breath. "We have come with a proposal, consul. Athens recognizes the authority of Rome. We are willing to pay tribute, to accept Roman oversight, but we ask that you allow us to maintain our council, not as a governing body, but as an advisory one. We ask that the tribute be set at a level that does not impoverish our city. We ask that Athens be allowed to preserve its character, its institutions of learning, its temples and theaters. We offer loyalty, consul. We ask for dignity in return." Mummius listened without expression. When Aristomenes finished, the consul was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming lightly on the map table. Then he spoke, his voice flat and final. "No." The word fell like a stone into still water. Aristomenes' face paled. "Consul, surely—" "No," Mummius repeated. "I gave you Rome's terms yesterday. They have not changed. You will dismantle your council entirely. You will accept a Roman governor with full authority. You will pay tribute at the rate Rome sets. These are not negotiable points." Nicias stepped forward, his voice rising. "You ask us to cease being Athens. You ask us to become nothing more than a Roman province." Mummius turned his cold gaze on the young orator. "I ask you to become part of Rome. That is not nothing, that is everything. Rome is the future, young man. Athens is the past. You can be part of what is coming, or you can be a footnote in history." Theron spoke, his voice low and controlled. "And if we refuse? If we choose to resist?" Mummius's expression did not change. "Then at noon today my legions will march on Athens. We will breach your walls. We will enter your city. Your men will be killed or enslaved. Your women and children will be sold. Your temples will be stripped. Your libraries will be burned. And when we are finished, Athens will be a memory, nothing more." The tent was silent except for the sound of Aristomenes' labored breathing. Cleomenes felt the world narrowing to this single moment, this single choice. "You give us no choice," Aristomenes said, his voice breaking. "I give you the only choice that matters," Mummius replied. "Survival or annihilation." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "I do not hate Athens, old man. I respect what it was, but what it was is not what Rome needs. Rome needs order. Rome needs unity. Rome needs every city in the Mediterranean to understand that there is one power, one law, one destiny, and that destiny is Roman." Aristomenes closed his eyes, and for a moment, Cleomenes thought the old man might weep. But when Aristomenes opened his eyes again, they were dry, though filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed to age him another decade. "Then we submit," Aristomenes whispered. "We submit to Rome." Mummius straightened. "A wise decision. You will return to Athens and inform your council. At midday, you will open your gates. I will enter with 1 legion. The other 3 will remain outside. We will conduct an orderly transition of power. There will be no looting, no violence, provided your citizens remain calm and obedient." He paused, then added almost gently, "Athens will survive, Aristomenes. It will not be what it was, but it will survive." The 4 Athenians turned to leave. As they reached the tent's entrance, Mummius spoke again. "Cleomenes." Cleomenes stopped and turned. "Yes, Consul? You are a teacher of rhetoric, are you not?" "I am." Mummius nodded slowly. "Then teach your students this. Words have power, but only when backed by strength. Rome has both. That is why Rome endures." Cleomenes said nothing. There was nothing to say. The walk back to Athens was the longest of Cleomenes' life. None of them spoke. Aristomenes leaned heavily on his walking stick, his breathing ragged. Nicias walked with his head down, tears streaming silently down his face. Theron stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. When they reached the Dippolon gate, the guards saw their faces and knew. Word spread through the city like wildfire. By the time the embassy reached the Pnyx, the entire city seemed to have gathered. The crowd was silent, waiting. Aristomenes stood before them, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the assembly ground, thin but clear. "Athens submits to Rome. At midday we will open our gates. The consul has given his word that there will be no violence if we remain calm. We have chosen survival over destruction. May the gods forgive us." The crowd did not erupt. There were no shouts, no protests. There was only silence, heavy and suffocating, the silence of a dream dying. The hours between dawn and midday passed like a funeral procession. Athens moved through the motions of surrender with the numb efficiency of the condemned. Cleomenes returned home briefly to find Euterpe standing in the doorway, her face pale but composed. She asked no questions. She simply embraced him, and they stood together in silence. "What will happen to us?" she finally asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "We will survive," Cleomenes said, though the words felt hollow. "We will adapt. We will endure. Will we still be us?" It was the question that haunted every Athenian that morning. Cleomenes had no answer. He kissed her forehead and left to join the others at the gate. The Dippolon gate stood open. Its massive wooden doors swung wide. Aristomenes was there, along with the remaining council members, Demetrios in his old military armor, Philon wringing his hands, and dozens of others who had come to witness the moment Athens ceased to be Athens. The streets leading to the gate were lined with citizens, silent and still as statues. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Old men leaned on walking sticks, their faces carved with grief. Young men stood with clenched fists and tears streaming down their faces, forbidden by their elders from doing anything foolish. Theron stood beside Cleomenes, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. "I keep thinking of Thermopylae," he said quietly. "Of Leonidas and his 300. They chose to die rather than submit. They also chose to be remembered as heroes," Cleomenes replied. "We have chosen to be remembered as survivors. History will judge which was wiser. History is written by the victors," Theron said, "and we are not the victors." Nicias stood apart from them, his face a mask of anguish. He had not spoken since they returned from the Roman camp, and Cleomenes worried that the young orator's spirit had broken entirely. At precisely midday, the sound reached them. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, then grew into a rhythmic pounding that shook the ground, the tramp of thousands of boots moving in perfect unison, the clank of armor and weapons, and then they appeared on the road, a column of iron and red stretching back as far as the eye could see. At the head of the column rode Mummius, mounted on a black horse, his armor polished to a mirror shine, his face expressionless. Behind him came the standards, the eagle of Rome, the banners of the legions, the symbols of a power that had conquered half the known world. The legion marched with mechanical precision, each century in perfect formation, shields locked, javelins resting on shoulders. They were not men, Cleomenes thought. They were a machine, a force of nature, as inevitable as the tide. Mummius reined in his horse before the gate and surveyed the assembled Athenians. His gaze swept over Aristomenes, over the council, over the silent crowds lining the streets. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then Aristomenes stepped forward, his walking stick tapping against the stone. He raised his hand in a gesture that was part greeting, part surrender. "Consul Mummius," he said, his voice carrying despite its weakness, "Athens opens its gates to Rome. We ask only that you honor your word and spare our people." Mummius dismounted and walked forward until he stood face to face with the old archon. For a long moment, The two men regarded each other, the representative of the old world and the representative of the new. "Your people will not be harmed," Mummius said, "provided they remain obedient. Resistance will be met with the full force of Roman law. Cooperation will be rewarded with Roman protection." Aristomenes bowed his head, and in that gesture, centuries of Athenian pride bent beneath the weight of Roman power. Mummius turned and raised his hand. The legion began to move forward, passing through the Dippolon gate in ordered ranks. The sound of their boots echoed off the walls, a drumbeat of conquest. The citizens of Athens watched in silence as the soldiers filled their streets, as the standards of Rome were planted in the agora, as their city was occupied without a single blow being struck. Cleomenes watched a young legionary, perhaps 19 or 20, march past. The boy's face was flushed with excitement, his eyes wide as he took in the sights of the legendary city. He was probably a farmer's son from some village in Latium, who had grown up hearing stories of Athens, and now found himself walking its streets as a conqueror. The irony was almost too bitter to bear. The legion spread through the city with practiced efficiency. Sentries were assigned to key locations: the Acropolis, the Agora, the harbors, the granaries. Within an hour, every strategic point in Athens was under Roman control. There was no looting, no violence. The soldiers were disciplined, professional. Mummius established his headquarters in the Stoa of Attalos, the grand colonnade that overlooked the Agora. From there he issued his first proclamations. The council was formally dissolved. All governmental authority was transferred to a Roman governor. A census would be conducted to assess tribute. All weapons were to be surrendered within 3 days. The proclamations were read in both Latin and Greek, posted on walls throughout the city. Cleomenes stood in the agora and listened to a Roman herald read the words, his voice flat and bureaucratic. Around him, Athenians listened in stunned silence. Some wept openly, others stared at the ground. A few, mostly the wealthy merchants like Philon, nodded with grim acceptance, already calculating how to profit under the new order. That evening, as the sun set over Athens, Cleomenes walked through the streets of his city. Roman soldiers stood at every corner, their presence a constant reminder of the new reality. The temples were still standing, the theaters still intact, the libraries still filled with scrolls, but something essential had been lost. He found himself at the base of the Acropolis, looking up at the Parthenon. The temple glowed in the fading light, its marble columns seeming to hold up the sky itself. It had stood for nearly 300 years, a monument to Athenian achievement. It would continue to stand, Cleomenes knew. The Romans would preserve it, would even admire it, but it would no longer be Athenian. It would be a museum piece, a relic of a dead age. Theron found him there, standing in the gathering darkness. "Aristomenes wants to discuss how we move forward." "Forward," Cleomenes repeated, tasting the word. "Is that what we are doing?" "What else can we do?" Theron asked. "We are alive. Our families are safe. The city still stands." "Yes," Cleomenes agreed. "We have survived." But at what cost? They stood together in silence, two philosophers in a city that no longer had use for philosophy, watching as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. And in the space between what was and what would be, the people of Athens learned what it meant to survive without truly living. The days that followed the occupation blurred together in a haze of adjustment and grief. Athens learned to live under Roman rule the way a body learns to live with a wound, the pain constant, but gradually becoming familiar. The legionaries patrolled the streets with disciplined regularity, their presence both reassuring and oppressive. They did not harass the citizens, did not loot the shops, did not violate the temples. But their very existence was a reminder that Athens no longer belonged to the Athenians. Cleomenes continued to teach, though his classes had dwindled. Many of his students had left the city, seeking opportunities elsewhere. Those who remained came more out of habit than passion, their questions lacking the fire they once had. One afternoon, a week after the occupation began, Cleomenes was teaching a small group in the shade of the Stoa Poikile when a Roman officer approached. The man was in his early 30s, clean-shaven in the Roman fashion, his armor marking him as a tribune. He waited politely until Cleomenes finished his point, then stepped forward. "Cleomenes of Athens?" the officer asked in fluent Greek. "I am he," Cleomenes replied, studying the man with cautious curiosity. "I am Tribune Marcus Claudius Marcellus," the officer said. "I have been appointed as liaison between the military administration and the civilian population. Consul Mummius has asked me to meet with prominent citizens to facilitate the transition." Cleomenes gestured to his students. We will continue tomorrow." The young men dispersed, casting nervous glances at the Roman officer. When they were alone, Marcellus sat on the stone bench, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "You speak Greek well," Cleomenes observed. "My father believed that to rule the Greeks one must understand them," Marcellus replied. "I studied in Rhodes for 3 years. I read Plato, Aristotle, Herodotus. I have great respect for Athenian culture." "Respect," Cleomenes said, the word tasting bitter. "Yet you occupy our city." "I follow orders," Marcellus said simply. "But I am not without sympathy for your situation. The consul wishes to make this transition as smooth as possible. He has asked me to identify individuals who can help bridge the gap between Roman authority and Athenian society." "Your name was mentioned." Cleomenes felt a chill run through him. "I am a teacher, Tribune. I have no interest in politics." "That is precisely why you are valuable," Marcellus said. "You are respected, but you are not a politician. You represent learning, not power. The consul believes that if men like you cooperate with the new administration, others will follow." "You are asking me to legitimize the occupation," Cleomenes said flatly. Marcellus did not flinch. "I am asking you to help your city survive. Rome is not leaving, Cleomenes. That is a fact. The question is whether Athens adapts and prospers, or resists and suffers. You can influence which path your people take." Cleomenes was silent for a long moment. He thought of Euterpe, of his students, of the city he loved. "I will consider your request," Cleomenes said finally, "but I make no promises." Marcellus nodded and stood. "That is all I ask. The consul will be hosting a gathering tomorrow evening at his headquarters. Prominent Athenians are invited. He hopes you will attend." After the tribune left, Cleomenes sat alone in the stoa, watching the shadows lengthen across the agora. He felt as though he were standing at the edge of a precipice. That evening, he discussed the encounter with Theron and Euterpe. They sat in his modest courtyard, the air cool and fragrant with jasmine. "They are trying to co-opt you," Theron said bluntly, "to make you a collaborator. If you accept, you will be seen as a traitor by many." "And if I refuse?" Cleomenes asked. "Then I accomplish nothing except to salve my own conscience. At least if I engage with them, I might be able to mitigate some of the harm." Euterpe, who had been listening quietly, spoke. "You have always taught that wisdom lies in understanding reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. What is the reality here?" Cleomenes met her eyes. "The reality is that Rome has won. We can rage against it, or we can try to preserve what we can within the new order. Then preserve what you can," Euterpe said, "but do not lose yourself in the process." The next evening, Cleomenes made his way to the stoa of Attalos, where Mummius had established his headquarters. The building had been transformed, Roman efficiency evident in every detail. Guards stood at attention at the entrance. Inside, the space had been divided into offices and meeting rooms. Cleomenes was led to a large chamber where perhaps 24 Athenians had gathered. He recognized most: Philon, looking comfortable and eager; Demetrios, stiff and uncomfortable; several wealthy landowners and merchants; and to his surprise, Nicias, standing in a corner with his arms crossed and his face set in barely controlled anger. Mummius entered, accompanied by Marcellus and Servilius. The consul had removed his armor and wore a simple toga, though his bearing remained unmistakably military. "Gentlemen," Mummius began in Greek, his accent thick but comprehensible, "I have invited you here because you represent the best of Athens. Rome does not wish to destroy Athens. Rome wishes to incorporate Athens into a larger vision of order and prosperity." He paused. "But for this to succeed, we need cooperation. In return, Rome offers protection, access to markets, and the opportunity to thrive within the greatest empire the world has ever known." Philon was the first to speak, his voice eager. "Consul, many of us recognize the benefits of Roman rule. What do you need from us?" "Practical assistance," Mummius replied. "Help with the census, with tax collection, with maintaining order. We also need voices of reason who can explain to the common people that cooperation is beneficial." Nicias suddenly stepped forward, his voice shaking. "You speak of cooperation and prosperity, but what you offer is slavery dressed in fine words. Some of us would rather die than live on our knees." The room fell silent. Mummius regarded Nicias with an expression that was almost sympathetic. "You are young. You still believe that pride is more important than survival. But let me tell you what I have learned. Dead men have no pride. Dead cities have no culture. Before Nicias could respond, Cleomenes stepped forward. "Consul, may I speak?" Mummius nodded. Cleomenes chose his words carefully. "You are correct that Athens cannot stand alone, but you must understand that what you are asking is profound. If you truly wish for Athens to thrive under Roman rule, you must allow us to preserve some sense of who we are. Allow the schools to continue operating independently. Allow the theaters to perform Greek plays. Allow the temples to maintain their traditions. These things do not threaten Roman authority, but they give Athenians a reason to accept it." Mummius studied him, then nodded slowly. "That is reasonable. Rome has no interest in suppressing Greek culture. What we require is political submission, not cultural erasure." He looked around the room. "Athens will be allowed to maintain its schools, theaters, temples, and festivals. In return, I expect cooperation with the census, tax collection, and public order. Is this acceptable?" There were murmurs of agreement. Philon nodded enthusiastically. Demetrios gave a grudging nod. Even Nicias, though his face remained stormy, said nothing. As the gathering dispersed, Marcellus approached Cleomenes. "That was well done. You may have just saved your city from a much harsher fate. Or I may have just helped Rome tighten its grip," Cleomenes replied. Marcellus smiled. "Perhaps both are true." Cleomenes walked home through streets now patrolled by Roman soldiers. He had made his choice. He had chosen survival over pride, pragmatism over principle. History would judge whether he had been wise or simply weak. 3 months passed. Athens settled into its new reality with the resigned acceptance of a patient recovering from surgery. The Roman governor arrived, a career administrator named Gaius Sulpicius Gallus, efficient and dispassionate, who treated Athens as he would any provincial city. The census was completed, the tribute assessed and collected. Roman law was implemented alongside Greek custom, creating a hybrid system that satisfied no one but functioned adequately. Cleomenes found himself in an uncomfortable position. He had become, almost by accident, a mediator between the Roman administration and the Athenian population. When disputes arose, both sides sought his counsel. He had not sought this role, but once it was thrust upon him, he could not abandon it without abandoning his city. Theron watched his friend's transformation with concern. One evening, as they walked along the walls of the Acropolis, he voiced his worry. "You are changing, Cleomenes. You speak more like a Roman administrator than an Athenian philosopher." Cleomenes stopped and looked out over the city. The sun was setting, painting the rooftops in gold and crimson. Roman standards flew from the agora, but the Parthenon still stood, unchanged and unchanging. "Perhaps I am," Cleomenes admitted. "Or perhaps I am simply learning to live in the world as it is, not as I wish it to be." "Philosophy also teaches us to know the difference between what can and cannot be changed," Theron replied. "And I fear you are accepting things that should be changed." Cleomenes turned to face his friend. "And what was Athens meant to be, Theron? A city frozen in time, clinging to past glories while the world moves on? We lost because we were weak, because we were divided. Rome won because Rome was stronger. That is the truth. So we should simply surrender everything?" Theron asked, his voice rising. "Our identity, our values, our very souls. We should survive," Cleomenes said quietly. "We should preserve what we can, adapt what we must, and hope that someday Athens will matter again. But that day is not today. Today, we are conquered, and the conquered do not have the luxury of pride." Theron was silent for a long moment, then shook his head. "I cannot accept that. I will not." He walked away, leaving Cleomenes alone on the walls. It was the last time they spoke as friends. In the weeks that followed, Theron withdrew from public life, refusing to cooperate with the Roman administration. He became a ghost in his own city, a living reminder of what had been lost. Nicias took a different path. The young orator left Athens entirely, seeking a place where Greek culture still flourished independent of Roman control. Cleomenes hoped he found what he was looking for, but he doubted it. Rome's shadow stretched across the entire Mediterranean now. Aristomenes died in his sleep one night, 2 months after the occupation. He was buried with honors, both Greek and Roman. At the funeral, Cleomenes delivered the eulogy, speaking of the archon's wisdom, his dedication to Athens, his impossible burden. But as he spoke, he wondered if Aristomenes had died of old age or of a broken heart. Mummius himself departed Athens in late autumn, recalled to Rome for his triumph. Before he left, he summoned Cleomenes to his headquarters one final time. The consul was in good spirits, his mission accomplished. "I wanted to thank you," Mummius said. pouring 2 cups of wine. Your cooperation made this transition far smoother than it might have been. Cleomenes accepted the cup but did not drink. I did what I believed was necessary to preserve my city consul. I take no pride in it. Mummius studied him. You made difficult choices in impossible circumstances. That is the burden of leadership. He raised his cup. To Athens. May it prosper under Roman rule. Cleomenes did not raise his cup. After a moment, Mummius lowered his and set it down. You still resent me. I understand you, Cleomenes said. You are a soldier following orders, building an empire, but understanding is not acceptance. You have taken something from Athens that can never be restored. Mummius nodded slowly. Empires rise and empires fall. Rome will not last forever. Nothing does. But ideas, culture, philosophy, these things endure. Athens may have lost its political independence, but its intellectual legacy will outlive Rome itself. In 1,000 years, men will still read Plato and Aristotle. Rome will be remembered for its roads and its laws, but Athens will be remembered for its mind. Is that not a form of victory? Cleomenes considered this. Perhaps. But it is a cold comfort to those of us living through the defeat. All comfort is cold to the defeated, Mummius said. But it is still comfort. The consul stood and extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Cleomenes took it. Then Mummius departed, and Cleomenes never saw him again. The years that followed were years of adjustment. Athens learned to be Roman, or at least to wear a Roman mask. The schools continued, the theaters performed, the temples received offerings. Life went on, as it always does, even in the shadow of conquest. Cleomenes grew old teaching in the same stoa where he had taught as a young man. His students were different now, many of them Romans who came to Athens to study Greek philosophy. He taught them well because that was what he did, but he never forgot what had been lost. One evening, in the last year of his life, Cleomenes sat in his courtyard, watching the stars emerge. He was 71 now, his beard white, his hands trembling with age. Euterpe sat beside him. Do you have regrets? She asked quietly. Cleomenes thought for a long time. I regret that I lived in an age of endings rather than beginnings. I regret that I could not save Athens from itself. But I do not regret that you are here beside me. I do not regret that our children grew up in a city that still stands, even if it stands diminished. Whether that makes me wise or weak, I no longer know. It makes you human, Euterpe said, taking his hand. And that is enough. Cleomenes died in his sleep 3 months later, almost exactly 30 years after Rome had marched through the Dipylon Gate. At his funeral, his former students spoke of his wisdom, his patience, his dedication to learning. They did not speak of the occupation, of the choices he had made. Those things were too painful, too complicated. But as the sun set over Athens that day, the truth remained. Athens had survived. It was not the Athens of Pericles or Socrates. It was a provincial city in a vast empire, its independence gone, its power broken. But it was still Athens. The Parthenon still stood. The agora still bustled. The theaters still performed. The schools still taught. Rome had conquered Athens with iron, but Athens had conquered Rome with ideas. And in the centuries that followed, long after the legions had marched away, long after the empire itself had crumbled into dust, the ideas remained. The Greek philosophers had mocked Roman soldiers, calling them brutes without culture, and the Roman soldiers had marched into Athens itself, proving that iron could defeat thought. But history had the last word, and history remembered Athens not for how it fell, but for what it gave the world. The age of Athens had ended, but the idea of Athens would never die. The end